So in this video, let's talk about what we call observational studies and experiments. And we're basically talking about ways that we can gather data. And these are generally two of the best ways we're going to do them in statistics. And when we look at this, we need to be able to distinguish between the two. And when we talk about this, the main thing we're going to focus on eventually are going to be experiments, but we need to know the difference between an observational study and an experiment. So in an observational study, there's a researcher, and the researcher is just observing some particular characteristic of the population. So we're going to look at a characteristic of the population. And the problem in an observational study is that the researcher has no control over what they're observing. They're just observing. And so because you don't have any control over that, what ends up happening is in an observational study, there are these variables that come into play that you can't control. And because we can't remove those variables from the study, we call those lurking variables. They're always going to be there. So they're always going to lurk. Then in an experiment, the researcher has direct control, which means they have influence within the actual experiment itself. And in particular, they can randomize people to different groups or they can give treatments to different groups. And the purpose of an experiment is to take that variable that you're looking at and you want to see if there is a direct cause and effect relationship between two of the variables. And in general, remember, we have our variables that we know in math as we know the independent is generally speaking, we say the independent is our x variable. The independent is the x variable, and the dependent is going to be our y variable. So in this particular study, we want to show that the independent x some kind of way causes. We wanted to cause y to change in some particular way. So that's what we're trying to look at. And there's these different variables that can be independent, but we're trying to study certain variables. And just like in a lurking variable is an observational study, there are variables that when we look at them, if we do not control for them in an experiment, they confound. And what that means is they're confounding the results. They're confounding x and y. And they're telling me that, well, I'm only studying x, but there's this third variable out here. Let's call that variable z. I think x may affect something. I think x causes y, but really and truthfully, it's z that's causing y. And so what I want to do is make sure that I always try to control in an experiment for these confounding variables. These are what we call those confound, because confounding variables play with the y variable, the dependent variable. And we're going to give these names now. This independent variable is what we're going to call our explanatory variable. And if you have in a study, you can have multiple explanatory variables. We call those factors. These are our factors. So those are all the independent variables that we can look at. The ones that we actually put into the study are called explanatory. And the dependent variable is what we're going to refer to as the response variable. And we talked about the response variable in linear regression, but response means that as x changes, how is y responding to x? So these are generally just how we start off in observational studies and experiments. And now what we're going to do is this. An observational study, remember, you're only looking at something, you're observing. In an experiment, you're trying to develop direct cause and effect. So now what we're going to do is, now that we know the difference, we're really going to look at focus on experiments and talk about the terminology in an experiment. So we have this example here, and it says, an article in the local newspaper reported that dogs kept as pets tend to be overweight. Veterinarians say that diet and exercise will help these chubby dogs get in shape. The veterinarian proposes two different diets, Diet A and Diet B, and two different exercise programs, Plan 1 and Plan 2. In Diet A, owners control the portions of dog food and dog treats. In Diet B, they use a mixture of fresh vegetables with the dog food and substitute regular dog treats with baby carrots. Plan 1 is 3 30-minute walks, so this is the exercise plan. And then Plan 2 is 20-minute walks daily. 60 dog owners volunteer to take part in an experiment to help their chubby dogs lose weight. So all I want to do is identify the key terms that we're going to talk about in experiments. And when I talk about that, here's how we start this. We're going to start off with what we call our subjects. And subjects is another way of saying the subjects. A subject is a human experimental unit. Well, in this case, we're not using humans to experiment on. We're actually using the dogs. And so we call these, when we talk about that in terms of, if they're not humans, we call them experimental units. So they have the same terminology, just one is a subject and one is a experimental unit. And here, our experimental units are who are we performing the experiment on? Well, these are going to be the 60 chubby dogs. That's who the actual experiment is being performed on, right? And the factors are what we call our independent variables. These are the independent variables. So my independent variables here are the variables that I can manipulate or change in this case are going to be two variables. And they told me right here that they proposed that two different diets and two different exercise. So the variables that can be manipulated or changed are diet and exercise. And when I change diet and exercise now, here's how this works. I'm gonna have to create groups, and I have 60. Remember, I have 60 dogs to deal with here. I want to create groups for these 60 dogs to actually test this. And they've told me that I have diet A and diet B. So I have a diet that has A and B. And then from there, if a dog goes to group A, which means they're going to take diet A, well, then they can do exercising based on plan one or plan two. Likewise with B, they can also do plan one or plan two. So you can see here, my treatment groups are going to have to conclude this branch right here, A1, this branch, A2, B1, and B2. So the actual treatments, the actual treatment groups, and that's how you do this. You look at your groups. What do I need to make this work? I need A1, A2. So diet A, plan one, diet A, plan two, diet B, plan one, diet B, plan two. Those are my treatments. The specific condition being applied to the groups. The response variable. Well, what am I trying to measure now? How do I know if these things are successful? Well, I know they're successful by measuring the dog's weight at the end. So I'm going to measure the weight of the dog. That's what we're going to measure. We're going to measure the weight of the dog as a response variable, right? And then the other thing we talked about, and the other thing you need to know is, for instance, placebos. Placebo is a specific type of treatment. Well, I'm not going to use this placebo for a dog. Do I really need to use a placebo there? Do I need to fake the dog out and make him think he's doing something? Not at all, right? A placebo is any kind of treatment that has no active ingredient. A placebo is no active ingredient. And then from there, we can talk about blinding and double blinding. Blinding is when the subject, or in this case, the dogs, don't know what they're getting. Well, first off, the problem with trying to blind this study is that the owners have to do everything for you. And because the owners know what's happening, the owners know they have to get diet A, plan one, or diet B, plan one, or diet A, plan two, plan B, diet two. They know they have to get that. And because they know they have to get that, they can't be blinded. So can we blind this or double blind? No, we can't do that. Double blind means that neither the experimental units of people that are actually doing these subjects or the researcher knows who got what. So here, is this a blind, double blind, or neither study? This is a neither experiment, and we can't do that again because we need our owners to know what's going on so they know what they're doing, and also we don't need to blind when we have non-human subjects. In this case, we have dogs, so we don't need to blind those people. But this is just a brief introduction into what experimental design is and the terminology behind it. The next videos will be over how to actually create a diagram for a design or how to create a diagram for an experiment.